It was a quiet evening at Frogmore Cottage, the kind of evening that should have been filled with calm, laughter, and the familiar sounds of a family unwinding. But for Prince Harry, peace had become a fleeting memory. He had come across something he wasn't meant to see, something that would shatter the fragile sense of security he had been clinging to since stepping away from the public eye. The envelope lay in front of him, unassuming at first glance. Its edges were slightly worn, the handwriting elegant yet deliberate. Inside, letters that would forever alter his understanding of his family life awaited. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Harry's fingers trembled as he broke the seal. Each letter, carefully folded and meticulously addressed, seemed to carry an invisible weight, as though the paper itself knew the secrets it bore. At first, he told himself it was just correspondence. Innocuous notes, perhaps a legal update, or something mundane. But the tone of the first few sentences sent a cold shiver down his spine. Words that were meant to be private, calculated phrases that hinted at plans far beyond the ordinary, and references that made his heart pound with disbelief. It was all there. These weren't just letters. They were confessions, meticulously penned, confirming a truth Harry had never dared to imagine. The letters discussed the use of surrogates, the careful orchestration of births, and the alteration of legal documents to create an image that had been presented to the world as reality. Archie and Lilibet, the children he had adored and protected with every ounce of his being, were now wrapped in a storm of secrecy and manipulation. His mind raced as he tried to reconcile what he was reading with the life he had believed was real. Questions came unbidden. Why would someone go to such lengths? Why hide this from me? From everyone? As the minutes stretched into hours, Harry's mind reeled through a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and anger. The letters didn't just reveal actions, they revealed intent. Each sentence laid bare a carefully constructed plan, a narrative engineered to protect a persona while concealing realities that Harry had thought were untouchable. And now, confronted with this tangible evidence, every reassurance he had once held on to seemed to crumble. The people he had trusted implicitly, the family he had believed in, were suddenly cast in a shadow of doubt and betrayal. The story, however, was more than just a matter of letters. It was a story of secrecy, of calculated appearances, and of decisions that had far-reaching consequences. These documents didn't merely suggest that surrogacy had been used. They implied a deliberate effort to construct a reality that would shield certain truths from both Harry and the public. The implications were enormous. Legal ramifications, ethical dilemmas, emotional fallout. All of these hung in the balance as Harry read line after line. It was impossible not to imagine the ripple effects that could extend beyond his immediate family, touching the monarchy, the media, and the millions of people who had followed their story with fascination and admiration. As he sat there, letters spread across the table, Harry couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led him here. Every public appearance, every carefully curated photograph, every announcement and media interview now seemed to carry layers of meaning he had never suspected. Was the pregnancy of Archie just an orchestrated performance? Was Lilibet's birth another carefully timed event to preserve appearances? The letters provided answers, yet the answers only seemed to deepen the mystery. The certainty of his past had been replaced by an overwhelming, almost suffocating uncertainty. Harry's emotions oscillated between anger, confusion, and heartbreak. The trust he had placed in Meghan, the woman he had loved and built a family with, now felt tainted by deception. His mind flashed to conversations, moments, and intimate confessions they had shared. Were they ever genuine? Had he been unknowingly complicit in a narrative that wasn't real? Each word in the letters seemed to echo through the room, a haunting reminder of a reality that was carefully engineered but emotionally devastating. The weight of responsibility also bore down heavily on him. How would he respond? Should he confront Meghan privately, or take a public stance? Could he protect the children while navigating the storm this revelation was certain to ignite? The gravity of the situation was not lost on him. Every decision, every reaction would carry consequences, not just for him, but for the monarchy, the media, and, most importantly, for Archie and Lilibet, whose lives now seemed to be caught in an intricate web of secrecy and manipulation. Even as the letters revealed truths that he had never imagined, Harry's mind turned to the public perception. The media scrutiny, already intense throughout their time in the spotlight, would escalate exponentially if the details of these letters ever surfaced. Headlines, viral videos, social media commentary, all of it would paint a picture of betrayal, deception, and scandal. Yet the private anguish he felt was far more consuming than any potential public fallout. These were not abstract events. These were the lives and identities of the people he loved most, now framed in a narrative that was being questioned at its very core. Harry's heart ached as he realized the depth of secrecy that had been maintained. Even the closest staff, those who had served the family for years, were reportedly kept in the dark. Protocols were unusual, questions were discouraged, and every detail had been tightly controlled. The realization that this level of planning had occurred without his knowledge left him feeling isolated, betrayed, and profoundly disoriented. Every familiar space in his home, every routine he had considered normal, suddenly carried an undercurrent of hidden intentions and concealed truths. As the evening stretched on, Harry began to piece together the broader picture. These letters, once mere pieces of paper, now represented a turning point. They were evidence of a reality that had been carefully manipulated, a narrative that had been controlled to protect appearances rather than transparency. And while the shock of discovery was immediate, the true challenge lay ahead. How to process, understand, and respond to a revelation that had the potential to reshape his family, his legacy, and his understanding of the very people he loved. The letters revealed more than just a secret plan. They revealed a pattern. Mentions of appointments, carefully coordinated timelines, and references to legal advisors and notaries who had allegedly overseen the creation of falsified documents painted a picture of premeditation and meticulous execution. Harry's mind could barely grasp the enormity of what he was holding. Every reference to a surrogate arrangement or a modified birth record made his stomach tighten, his chest feel heavy. It was not just the revelation itself, but the realization that these actions had been carried out with the knowledge and consent of those closest to him, all while maintaining an image of a traditional family narrative to the outside world. Harry's thoughts drifted to his parents, to the lessons he had absorbed about trust, loyalty, and integrity within the royal family. His mother, Princess Diana, had always emphasized honesty, openness, and the courage to confront difficult truths. And now, faced with these letters, he felt the weight of her absence more acutely than ever. How would Diana have reacted? What advice would she have given him in a moment so profoundly disorienting, so deeply personal? The sense of isolation was overwhelming. The very foundation of his private life had been shaken, leaving him to navigate a storm of emotions without a compass. As he read further, Harry noticed subtle shifts in tone within the letters themselves. The initial clinical descriptions gave way to more personal reflections, moments of self-justification, and occasionally, a hint of guilt. It was as if the author had anticipated the moment these letters might be discovered, carefully balancing confession with rationalization. Harry's heart ached with each line, not only because of the betrayal, but because he could sense the internal conflict embedded within the writing. It was a stark reminder that human decisions, even when shrouded in secrecy, are never entirely devoid of conscience. The implications for Archie and Lilibet were immediate and pressing. Harry had always believed that his role as a father was to protect, nurture, and provide stability. But now, the very essence of that stability was called into question. He imagined how these revelations, if exposed publicly, could affect the children emotionally and socially. Even if the world remained ignorant, the knowledge that their very births had been manipulated for appearances would weigh heavily on him. The responsibility he felt was immense. He had to reconcile the private anguish he felt with the protective instincts that had defined his role as a father from the moment Archie was born. Harry also began to consider the broader network involved in maintaining this secrecy. Staff members, legal advisors, public relations consultants, and possibly even friends, all had reportedly been kept in the dark, bound by strict instructions and confidentiality agreements. The level of orchestration required to execute such a plan without leaks was staggering. It suggested not only careful planning but also a relentless commitment to control the narrative at every turn. For Harry, The realization of just how deeply entrenched this operation had been was almost as shocking as the revelations themselves. He paused for a moment, placing his hands over his face, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. Every instinct told him to confront, to demand explanations, but another part of him feared the confrontation could fracture relationships irreparably. The tension between seeking truth and preserving bonds was nearly unbearable. Each scenario he imagined seemed to carry consequences too great to fully process. The emotional stakes were high, the potential fallout immense, and yet there was no turning back. The letters were now a permanent part of his reality, and every word demanded acknowledgement, understanding, and eventual action. In the stillness of the evening, Harry reflected on how much of his life had been orchestrated for public perception. The royal spotlight had always cast shadows. Intense scrutiny, media speculation, and public expectations created an environment in which secrecy often seemed necessary. But nothing could have prepared him for the personal, intimate betrayal these letters represented. The difference between public scrutiny and private manipulation was vast. One could brace for headlines, anticipate gossip, and prepare for public commentary. But private deception, especially involving the most personal aspects of family and children, cut far deeper, leaving scars that could not be seen, only felt. And yet, despite the pain, there was a glimmer of clarity. The letters, as devastating as they were, also provided undeniable truth. For the first time, Harry had concrete evidence of decisions that had been made without his consent or knowledge. While the revelations brought heartbreak and anger, they also offered a form of understanding, a painful, unvarnished insight into actions and intentions that had previously been obscured. It was a moment of reckoning, a confrontation with reality in its most raw and uncompromising form. As the night deepened, Harry made a silent vow. He would navigate this revelation with courage, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to his children. The letters, while shocking and devastating, would not define his ability to love, protect, and advocate for Archie and Lilibet. They were a reminder of the complexities of trust, the fragility of perception, and the resilience required to confront truths that challenge the very core of one's family life. He realized that, while betrayal could wound, it could also catalyze a deeper understanding, a more resolute determination to seek clarity and protect what mattered most. The introduction of these letters into Harry's life marked a turning point, a moment that would redefine his relationships, his public narrative, and his private sense of security. Every sentence he had read, every implication he had absorbed, demanded not just reaction but reflection. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional, social, and legal complexities. Yet in the quiet of that night, Harry felt a spark of resolve, a determination to confront the truth, protect his family, and navigate a reality that, while forever altered, could still be approached with integrity, courage, and love. The discovery of the letters was, for Harry, both shocking and almost surreal. It began with a routine task, a casual search through a drawer he rarely opened, a place he had previously used to store correspondence, childhood mementos, and letters from well-wishers over the years. But this time, something about the envelope caught his attention. Unlike the usual polished stationery that arrived from friends or official correspondence, this envelope felt heavier, denser, and slightly textured, as though it carried a weight beyond the mere paper it contained. It was unmarked except for the elegant scrawl of Meghan's handwriting, which immediately triggered an unease he couldn't quite place. His initial reaction was disbelief. Harry thought perhaps it was a letter meant for another purpose, something minor and procedural. But as he slit the envelope open and unfolded the first page, a sense of cold dread settled over him. The words on the page were careful, deliberate, and meticulous. They weren't casual musings or fleeting thoughts. They were instructions, reflections, and discussions about arrangements that would shape the very fabric of the family he had always believed to be straightforward and genuine. His eyes moved across phrases that mentioned surrogates, carefully timed births, and legal documentation that was designed to construct an illusion. Each line he read deepened the knot of tension in his chest, making it almost impossible to breathe normally. Harry's mind began to race. Every letter seemed to build upon the previous one, creating a narrative that was hard to ignore. Dates, names, and references to legal advisors and coordinators suggested that these actions had been planned months, even years in advance. The notion that the births of Archie and Lilibet might have been orchestrated with surrogate mothers, rather than occurring naturally as he had been led to believe, was nearly impossible to reconcile with the reality he had lived. Every tender moment he remembered, every cradle song, every first step, every smile and laugh, was suddenly tinged with doubt. He questioned whether he had unknowingly been part of a narrative that had been carefully curated, and the realization brought both anger and profound sadness. The letters did not stop at simply outlining the surrogacy arrangements. They went further, discussing legal measures designed to ensure the world would perceive Meghan as having given birth herself. Mentions of modified birth certificates, carefully timed announcements, and precise wording for public statements left Harry reeling. It was one thing to contemplate surrogacy as a private family matter. It was another entirely to discover that legal documents had been allegedly altered to present a false reality to the world. Each revelation felt like a fracture in the life he had built, as though the very foundations of trust had been undermined. Harry's emotions oscillated wildly. There was an immediate sense of betrayal, an acute understanding that the person he had loved most had acted without his knowledge or consent. He replayed countless conversations in his mind, searching for moments where he might have sensed hints or clues, moments when he had missed the truth. Every interaction, every planning session for births and celebrations, was now colored with suspicion. Had he been deliberately excluded from decisions that were central to the lives of his own children? The anger was tempered by sorrow, a deep grief for the perceived loss of a reality he had once believed was genuine. As the hours passed, Harry continued to read and reread the letters, trying to absorb every detail, every nuance. Some passages were particularly jarring, references to backup plans, to contingencies in case of unexpected complications, to instructions on how to handle staff and external observers. These were not idle musings. They were operational strategies designed to control every aspect of perception. He realized that even those closest to him, nannies, household staff, and advisors, may have been instructed to participate in the maintenance of the narrative without fully understanding the implications. The orchestration was not only meticulous but also emotionally manipulative, creating a web that extended beyond the private sphere into public perception. One line, in particular, struck him with the force of a sledgehammer, a detailed description of how to stage announcements and document the births in such a way that any external inquiry would be impossible to trace. Harry's heart sank. This was not merely about secrecy. It was about constructing a reality, controlling a narrative, and ensuring that appearances aligned with intention rather than truth. The realization that someone had gone to such lengths, carefully planning each step, left him both shocked and disoriented. It was as if the very life he had taken for granted had been built on layers of concealment. Despite the overwhelming nature of the revelations, Harry's analytical mind began to process the implications. He recognized that confronting this information would require measured action, a strategy that considered both the emotional and practical consequences. Every decision, from whether to confront privately to how to handle potential public exposure, carried profound weight. The legal ramifications alone were complex. Altered birth records, surrogate arrangements, and the management of narrative control could have consequences that extended far beyond the private family sphere, potentially implicating advisors, legal professionals, and staff. Yet, amidst the storm of disbelief and anger, Harry's love for his children remained unwavering. The letters, though devastating, did not change his commitment to protecting Archie and Lilibet. He understood that their innocence and well-being must be prioritized above all else. The revelation that their births might have been orchestrated did not diminish his responsibility as a father. If anything, it intensified it. He resolved to approach the situation with clarity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth while safeguarding the emotional and psychological welfare of his children. Harry also wrestled with a profound sense of isolation. Even as he recognized the need for careful consideration and strategic response, there was an emotional void, an understanding that the very person who should have been his partner in trust and transparency had instead operated in secrecy. This isolation was compounded by the public scrutiny that had always accompanied his life. Even private revelations carried the risk of becoming public spectacle, amplified by media speculation, social media discourse, and the relentless curiosity of a global audience. The letters, while personal, had implications that reached far beyond the confines of Frogmore Cottage, touching the monarchy, the public, and the broader narrative of his family life. Each subsequent reading of the letters revealed additional layers of planning and foresight. References to contingency measures, alternative narratives, and methods to maintain secrecy suggested a level of foresight that was almost surgical in its precision. It became clear to Harry that the orchestration was not impulsive or reactive. It was deliberate, premeditated, and designed to control outcomes at every possible turn. The sense of betrayal deepened, yet he also understood that responding impulsively could exacerbate the situation, potentially causing harm to those he most wanted to protect. Even as the weight of the letters pressed down on him, Harry found himself reflecting on the broader context of their lives. The media scrutiny, the constant pressure of public perception, and the relentless expectations of the royal institution had always created an environment in which secrecy seemed necessary. Yet the private orchestration revealed in these letters went far beyond mere privacy. It was a strategic manipulation of reality itself. The distinction between maintaining privacy and orchestrating deception became painfully clear. As the night stretched into early morning, Harry finally set the letters down, exhausted both physically and emotionally. The sheer scale of what he had uncovered was staggering, but so too was the clarity it provided. He knew that the path forward would be difficult, fraught with challenges that spanned the personal, legal, and public spheres. Yet amidst the turmoil, there was a spark of determination, an understanding that while these revelations would shape the course of his actions, they would not define his love, integrity, or commitment to his family. The letters were a catalyst for change, a call to confront reality with courage and resolve. The morning after discovering the letters, Harry felt a restless tension that made sleep impossible. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him with every heartbeat, and the questions that plagued him refused to dissipate. How long had this been planned? How many people had been complicit? And most urgently, why had he been left in the dark, kept away from decisions that affected the lives of his own children? These questions twisted in his mind, relentless and unyielding, demanding answers that he knew could only come from one person, Meghan. He approached her cautiously, aware that the conversation ahead would not merely be a discussion. It would be a confrontation that could redefine their relationship forever. As he entered the room where Meghan was quietly reading, he noticed a subtle shift in her expression, a flicker of unease that seemed almost imperceptible. It was enough to alert him that she sensed his discovery, that the secret he had unearthed was now on the brink of exposure. Harry took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions raging inside him. He began with measured words, aiming for clarity rather than accusation. "I found the letters," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I know about the surrogacy, the arrangements, and the altered documents. I need to understand why you kept this from me." For a moment, Meghan remained silent, her eyes flicking to the floor, as if choosing carefully which words to offer. Then, with a quiet but deliberate tone, she began to speak. Her explanation was complex, layered with reasoning that reflected both planning and justification. She spoke of privacy, of pressure from the media, and of the desire to maintain a public narrative that aligned with what she perceived to be the best interests of the family. She framed the actions as protective, a shield against scrutiny, a way to ensure stability in the midst of a life lived under relentless observation. But Harry could not shake the feeling of betrayal that had settled deep in his chest. Protective measures, he realized, should never require deception of this magnitude. To orchestrate surrogacies, alter birth documents, and systematically control every narrative surrounding the children's origins without his knowledge was not protective, it was controlling. It was manipulation, carried out under the guise of care. His mind raced through the implications, the legal ramifications, the moral consequences, and the emotional fallout that could ripple outward from this revelation. As the conversation continued, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Words were chosen carefully, but the underlying current of hurt and anger was unmistakable. Harry pressed for more details, seeking clarity on timelines, the involvement of staff, and the extent to which external advisors had been included. Meghan responded with cautious honesty, revealing names of legal consultants, coordinators, and select household staff who had been privy to the arrangements. Each disclosure was like a new layer peeled away, exposing the depth of planning and the scope of secrecy that had been maintained. The conversation was interrupted briefly by the arrival of a senior staff member who had been tasked with daily routines but was unaware of the full extent of the surrogacy arrangements. Harry felt a pang of frustration as he realized how carefully the orchestration had been maintained. Even the closest household aides had been kept in the dark about critical aspects of the plan. The staff member, sensing the tension, attempted to navigate the situation diplomatically, offering reassurances that they were committed to supporting the family, though their lack of full knowledge highlighted the deliberate compartmentalization that had been engineered. Harry's mind cycled through the moral dilemmas that this revelation presented. He understood the instinct to protect family and shield children from scrutiny, but at what cost? Was the preservation of appearances worth the erosion of trust, both within the marriage and among the staff who had been unwittingly enlisted as participants in a narrative they did not fully understand? The ethical complexity was staggering, and he found himself grappling with questions that had no easy answers. The legal implications were equally troubling. Altered birth records, surrogacy arrangements, and the management of public narrative could constitute serious legal breaches depending on jurisdiction and the interpretation of consent. Harry recognized that any action he took needed to be deliberate and precise. Legal counsel would be essential, but even before that step could be taken, there was the immediate human dimension, the confrontation, the discussions, and the emotional reckoning that could not be avoided. As the hours passed, Harry began to consider the wider ramifications beyond the private sphere. The monarchy, the public, and the media were all variables in this unfolding situation. The revelation of surrogacy arrangements and falsified documentation would not only affect his personal life, but could also spark international attention, controversy, and debate. The potential for reputational damage, legal scrutiny, and media sensationalism weighed heavily on him. He knew that any response would need to be carefully calibrated, balancing the pursuit of truth with the protection of those he loved most. The emotional intensity of the confrontation with Meghan reached a peak as Harry voiced his feelings of betrayal, hurt, and disbelief. He expressed his frustration at having been excluded from decisions that were fundamentally central to his family's reality. Meghan, in turn, acknowledged the deliberate choices she had made, framing them as necessary measures to control outcomes in a world that was often intrusive and judgmental. The tension between personal justification and relational trust became the central battleground of the conversation, a dynamic that would shape the immediate aftermath and influence future decisions. Amid the emotional turbulence, Harry also considered the children. Archie and Lilibet's welfare was paramount. How could he ensure their emotional stability and protect them from potential fallout? The challenge was daunting. He needed to navigate complex legal landscapes, media scrutiny, and personal betrayal, all while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for the children. He understood that any action taken recklessly could have irreversible consequences for their sense of security and identity. He reflected on the role of staff, whose loyalty and discretion had been both a shield and a potential vulnerability. The compartmentalization of knowledge meant that even minor slip-ups could compromise the secrecy that had been maintained so carefully. Harry realized that part of his immediate strategy would involve assessing who could be trusted, what information could be safely disclosed, and how to ensure that the children's lives were insulated from unnecessary exposure. As the day unfolded, Harry's emotions shifted from shock and disbelief to a measured resolve. The discovery of the letters had shattered his perception of reality, but it also illuminated the path forward. He recognized that clarity, strategic planning, and emotional intelligence would be crucial in navigating the next steps. Confronting Meghan, understanding the full scope of the arrangements, and evaluating the legal and ethical dimensions became urgent priorities. Each decision required careful consideration, weighing the immediate impact against long-term consequences for both his family and the public perception of their lives. Harry also began to document his own reflections, recording observations, timelines, and reactions in a private journal. This process served multiple purposes. It provided an emotional outlet, created a detailed record of events for potential legal consultation, and offered a framework for processing the sheer volume of information he had uncovered. Each entry became a tool for clarity, allowing him to navigate the storm of emotions and begin formulating a coherent plan for addressing the situation. By evening, the initial confrontation had concluded, but the implications were far from settled. Harry found himself balancing the immediate need to protect his children, the necessity of addressing the legal and ethical ramifications, and the personal reckoning required to process the betrayal he felt. The letters, once a hidden artifact in a drawer, had become a catalyst for change, forcing him to confront realities he had never anticipated and demanding a level of strategic thinking and emotional resilience that would define the coming weeks, months, and perhaps years. Amid the turmoil, one thing was clear. The discovery of the letters had irrevocably altered the landscape of Harry's life. It was no longer a matter of private assumptions or unspoken questions. The truth, as unsettling as it was, had emerged in black and white. The path forward required courage, careful deliberation, and an unwavering commitment to safeguarding the integrity and well-being of the children he loved most. Every decision from this point onward would carry the weight of consequence, shaping not only the future of his family, but also the legacy of trust, transparency, and accountability he sought to uphold. The following morning, Harry awoke with a mixture of resolve and apprehension. The discovery of Meghan's letters had left an indelible mark on his psyche, and the weight of responsibility now rested squarely on his shoulders. He knew that moving impulsively could have devastating consequences, yet inaction was equally dangerous. The first step, he decided, had to be a careful consultation with legal experts who could navigate the complex interplay of family law, surrogacy regulations, and potential ramifications of falsified documentation. He reached out to a trusted legal advisor, one who had long assisted him in personal and public matters, and arranged a confidential meeting at a secure location. The gravity of the situation was palpable as he explained, in precise terms, the contents of the letters. The legal advisor listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions to clarify details, such as dates, involved parties, and the scope of documentation that had been altered. Harry provided as much context as possible without revealing unnecessary personal emotion, recognizing that clarity of facts would be the cornerstone of any subsequent legal strategy. The discussion quickly expanded into an exhaustive review of possible courses of action. The letters, now evidence, revealed a meticulously orchestrated plan, arrangements for surrogates for both Archie and Lilibet, deliberate concealment of these arrangements from him, and the creation of false legal records to suggest he had been fully informed or that Meghan herself had carried the children. Each point was analyzed for legal vulnerability, potential media fallout, and long-term implications for the children's welfare. Harry's legal advisor emphasized the importance of prioritizing the children's immediate protection. The possibility of public exposure had to be carefully managed, as the revelation could spark a media frenzy with unpredictable consequences. Any disclosure, even to a limited circle, needed to be strategically planned, with precise messaging and timing to minimize risk. The potential involvement of surrogacy agencies, legal authorities, and external consultants further complicated the scenario. Harry listened intently, internalizing the intricate balance between transparency, accountability, and the protection of those most vulnerable. Next, they discussed media strategy. Harry knew that in today's world, secrecy could only last for so long. Leaks were almost inevitable, and speculation could quickly spiral out of control, potentially misrepresenting the truth or damaging reputations unfairly. Together with the legal advisor, they mapped out a proactive approach, controlling the narrative as much as possible, determining which statements could be made publicly, and establishing boundaries to prevent sensationalized distortions. The goal was to safeguard the children while maintaining integrity in the unfolding disclosure. Harry also reflected on his relationships with key staff members who had been unwitting participants in the surrogacy arrangement concealment. While none had acted with malice, Their compartmentalized knowledge had made them susceptible to pressure, uncertainty, and potential involvement in media speculation. He knew he needed to engage with them carefully, ensuring loyalty and discretion while also clarifying what could and could not be shared externally. Their support would be critical, not only for the children's immediate well-being, but also for maintaining order within the household as the revelations continued to unfold. The discussion inevitably turned to legal documentation. Harry examined the letters with his advisor, noting specific language that outlined intentions, agreements, and procedural steps. Each sentence carried weight, each detail a potential lever for either negotiation or litigation. The legal advisor emphasized meticulous record-keeping. Every page, every note, every corroborating document had to be cataloged, verified, and safeguarded. This process, though painstaking, was essential. Any discrepancy or omission could be exploited in ways that might complicate or undermine Harry's ability to protect his family. As they delved deeper, Harry's attention returned to the children. How would Archie and Lilibet process the eventual revelation of the truth? Even if managed carefully, the emotional impact could be profound. The advisor highlighted the importance of involving child psychologists or family counselors to guide the children through potential identity questions and emotional uncertainty. Protecting their psychological well-being was not merely a moral imperative. It was a legal and strategic necessity. Harry made a mental note to engage trusted professionals who could support the family through every step, ensuring a controlled environment that prioritized empathy and stability. The next consideration was the broader public. Harry understood that the monarchy, media outlets, and global audiences had a vested interest in the unfolding situation. Public scrutiny was inevitable, but the timing, tone, and framing of any disclosure could influence both the reception and the consequences. He and his legal advisor discussed contingency plans for every scenario: private leaks, accidental disclosures, investigative journalists, and even potential hostile commentary. Each scenario required a tailored response, balancing truthfulness with strategic discretion. Harry also contemplated the implications for Meghan. While anger and betrayal coursed through him, he recognized that their relationship, complex, deeply intertwined, and public, required careful handling. Confrontation alone could escalate tension, compromise legal strategy, or further destabilize the household. It was necessary to approach interactions with her strategically, combining directness with measured restraint, ensuring that every exchange contributed constructively to the resolution rather than creating unnecessary collateral damage. By midday, Harry shifted focus to potential advisors beyond legal counsel. He began considering trusted friends, family confidants, and professionals who could provide guidance in financial, logistical, and psychological domains. Each advisor had to be vetted for discretion and expertise. Decisions made in the heat of emotion could have far-reaching consequences, so assembling a multidisciplinary team became a priority. Harry understood that this was not merely a legal challenge. It was a comprehensive crisis management scenario that required precision, foresight, and empathy. The afternoon was spent reviewing the letters again, breaking down the language and implications in a methodical manner. Certain passages suggested that Meghan had anticipated resistance, carefully constructing contingencies for potential objections or questions. Others revealed a calculated awareness of legal boundaries, suggesting that every step had been designed to minimize risk while achieving specific objectives. Harry's sense of betrayal deepened, but so too did his resolve. Understanding the mechanics of the plan was essential for navigating the aftermath responsibly. Throughout the process, Harry also reflected on the ethical dimension. Surrogacy, legal documentation, and familial arrangements were not merely bureaucratic tasks. They carried profound moral weight. The concealment of truth, the alteration of legal records, and the deliberate exclusion from decision-making presented ethical dilemmas that could not be ignored. Harry understood that reconciling legality with morality would be a continual challenge, requiring careful judgment, compassion, and unwavering integrity. As evening approached, Harry began drafting a preliminary plan for disclosure and internal communication. The first step would be to protect the children and staff, ensuring that only essential parties had access to sensitive information. The second step involved formalizing the documentation of letters, corroborating evidence, and potential witness statements. The third step considered the public narrative, mapping out how to present the facts in a manner that was truthful, legally sound, and minimally disruptive to those involved. Each phase demanded precision, patience, and strategic foresight. By nightfall, Harry felt a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. The initial shock had given way to a deliberate focus, a sense that he could navigate the complex labyrinth of personal, legal, and public challenges before him. While the letters had unveiled a truth that altered the very foundation of his family, they also provided a roadmap. Clarity, documentation, and strategic action would guide the way forward. In the quiet of the evening, Harry sat alone with his thoughts, reflecting on the enormity of the situation. The letters were more than words on paper. They were a catalyst for truth, accountability, and protection. They demanded courage, discernment, and a commitment to principles that transcended immediate emotion. And as he prepared for the next steps, legal consultations, staff engagement, and eventual public navigation, he recognized that the responsibility he bore was profound, yet manageable through meticulous planning, strategic action, and unwavering dedication to the children he loved more than anything. He began with a small, private briefing with his most trusted aides. In a secure room away from prying eyes and listening devices, he outlined the situation in precise terms. There was no dramatization, no emotional outburst. Just facts, a clear articulation of what he knew, and what he expected from them moving forward. The aides listened intently, understanding that their roles had shifted dramatically overnight. They were no longer just managing day-to-day palace operations. They were now integral to a broader strategy aimed at protecting the children and ensuring discretion in an environment prone to leaks and speculation. Harry emphasized that the priority was the children. Archie and Lilibet's routines, education, and emotional stability could not be disrupted, and any revelation, even partial, needed to be carefully staged. The aides were instructed to maintain normalcy, provide support, and report any unusual inquiries or interactions. Harry made it clear that any breach of confidentiality could have serious consequences, not as a threat, but as a measure to ensure the family's collective security. Next, he addressed the possibility of external observation. The palace, with its layers of protocol and security, was nonetheless vulnerable to journalists, paparazzi, and opportunistic insiders. Harry instructed the aides to be vigilant, noting that seemingly innocuous questions or offhand remarks could indicate information being tested or leaked. Every interaction outside the inner circle required scrutiny, and communication channels needed to be secure, documented, and monitored. Harry recognized that control over information flow was critical. The fewer points of potential exposure, the greater their ability to manage outcomes. During the briefing, Harry also explored the staff's personal experiences and observations. He asked probing questions. Had they noticed inconsistencies in routines, unusual instructions, or changes in protocols that now appeared significant in light of the letters? The aides recalled moments that had seemed inconsequential at the time. Sudden absences, last-minute directives, or vague explanations for actions. These recollections were invaluable. Each memory, now reframed through the lens of the surrogacy revelation, provided potential evidence or context for legal and strategic decisions. Harry then moved to the topic of communication. He instructed the aides to maintain a strict chain of command, ensuring that information reached him first before any external disclosure. He also emphasized that personal emotions, shock, anger, or confusion, had to be managed to prevent inadvertent leaks. While acknowledging the difficulty of this restraint, Harry framed it as a moral and strategic necessity. Protecting the children and the integrity of the family required self-discipline from everyone involved. The conversation inevitably touched on the legal implications for staff. While no aide had acted with malice, their previous lack of awareness could have exposed them to scrutiny or questioning from legal authorities. Harry, working closely with his legal advisors, reassured them that their roles had been procedural, not complicit, and that as long as they followed directives and documented observations accurately, they would remain protected. This reassurance was vital in fostering trust and commitment, ensuring that the staff remained engaged in the family strategy rather than distracted by fear. Harry also prepared the aides for potential interactions with external parties. Whether journalists, legal representatives, or members of the public, every encounter had to be navigated carefully. They rehearsed potential scenarios, deflecting questions, providing neutral yet credible responses, and avoiding speculation. Harry knew that even minor misstatements could snowball into widely circulated misinformation. By equipping his staff with clarity and confidence, he aimed to minimize risk while maintaining operational stability. As the morning progressed, Harry convened a secondary meeting focused on operational logistics. This session addressed the practicalities of managing the household while safeguarding information. Schedules, access points, and surveillance measures were reviewed. Harry insisted on enhanced monitoring of correspondence, restricted access to sensitive documents, and careful management of digital communications. Each measure was designed to reduce the possibility of accidental leaks and ensure that any breach could be quickly identified and addressed. Simultaneously, Harry considered the emotional atmosphere within the household. He recognized that the staff, though professional, would be affected by the gravity of the situation. Maintaining morale, offering reassurance, and fostering a sense of shared purpose were essential. Harry framed the disclosure not as a punitive revelation, but as a collective challenge. Protecting the children and family integrity required unity, vigilance, and disciplined discretion. He encouraged open dialogue within controlled parameters, allowing aides to voice concerns while reinforcing the central objective. By midday, Harry began coordinating with external advisors in preparation for controlled public engagement. He reached out to media consultants, crisis management experts, and public relations specialists, each selected for their experience in handling sensitive family disclosures. The objective was to craft a narrative that balanced transparency with discretion, mitigating the risk of sensationalism while preserving the family's dignity and reputation. Every potential statement, press release, or communication was to be pre-approved, with contingencies for unexpected developments. In tandem with media strategy, Harry explored psychological support structures for staff. He acknowledged that navigating a high-profile family crisis, particularly one involving surrogacy concealment and altered legal documents, could be stressful. Confidential counseling, peer support groups, and structured debriefing sessions were proposed to ensure that the aides could operate effectively without being overwhelmed by the emotional burden. Harry understood that the well-being of his staff directly influenced their ability to maintain discretion and protect the children. The afternoon included a detailed review of the letters themselves with a small, trusted team. Harry wanted to extract actionable insights, specific dates, procedural steps, and any indications of further surrogacy-related activities. This review was meticulous, requiring multiple readings, cross-referencing with existing household records, and noting any discrepancies. The aim was to anticipate potential challenges, both legal and operational, and to prepare responses that were fact-based and verifiable. As evening approached, Harry reflected on the broader implications. Beyond the immediate household and staff, the potential for public discovery loomed large. Social media, tabloids, and global news outlets were unpredictable forces. Any misstep could amplify the scandal, placing the children, staff, and even extended family under scrutiny. Harry recognized that proactive strategy, combined with careful timing, was the only way to mitigate these risks. Finally, Harry initiated a phased communication plan for the staff. It involved 3 stages: immediate operational directives, medium-term reinforcement of confidentiality and morale, and eventual coordinated guidance for managing external inquiries. Each stage was carefully structured to ensure that staff understood their roles, the rationale behind decisions, and the importance of maintaining discretion. Harry emphasized that their commitment could directly influence the family's ability to navigate the surrogacy revelation with integrity. By nightfall, the first day of staff engagement concluded with a sense of cautious progress. The aides, though initially stunned by the revelations, had begun to grasp the strategic imperatives. Harry felt a measure of relief. The initial step of internal consolidation had been accomplished without leaks, panic, or disruption. The next phase, managing potential external exposure, refining legal strategy, and preparing the children for eventual understanding, would require equal diligence, yet he now had the foundation to proceed with purpose and control. In the quiet of his private quarters, Harry reviewed the day's events, mentally rehearsing the next steps. Every interaction, directive, and document had been carefully considered, and the path forward, though fraught with challenges, had begun to take shape. He understood that this was only the beginning of a complex journey, one that demanded unwavering focus, strategic clarity, and relentless dedication to the children's welfare and family integrity. As he prepared for the coming days, he felt a renewed sense of resolve. The letters had revealed a hidden truth, but they had also provided him with the knowledge and insight necessary to navigate the storm with intelligence, discretion, and moral fortitude. In the solitude of his private quarters, Harry sat quietly, the weight of the letters pressing on his mind. The room was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, echoing the complexity of the decisions before him. Each letter he had read seemed to pulse with unspoken consequences, revealing layers of planning, secrecy, and deliberate orchestration. The reality that Meghan had arranged surrogates and manipulated legal documents to create the illusion of natural birth unsettled him profoundly. The question that now dominated his thoughts was not simply how to respond, but how to navigate a confrontation that could redefine their relationship and affect the lives of their children irrevocably. Harry's first instinct was to confront Meghan directly. He envisioned a scenario where he could demand clarity, voice the hurt and betrayal he felt, and seek explanations for the secrecy and deception. But as he considered this, the practical and emotional risks became starkly apparent. A direct confrontation carried the danger of immediate escalation, emotional volatility, and potential public exposure if anything went awry. Meghan's reactions were unpredictable. The letters demonstrated meticulous planning and strategic thinking. Approaching her without preparation could allow defensiveness, miscommunication, or manipulation, all of which could undermine his position and potentially destabilize the fragile equilibrium within the household. He weighed the alternative: mediated negotiation. By involving trusted legal advisors or neutral intermediaries, he could create a controlled environment that allowed for structured dialogue. This approach offered several advantages: documentation of the conversation, the presence of witnesses to ensure accountability, and a framework that minimized emotional overreaction. It also allowed him to clarify objectives before engagement, confirming the surrogacy arrangements, understanding the scope of document alteration, and establishing agreements for future transparency and conduct. While this method seemed prudent, it risked introducing an element of formality that could be perceived as distrust or alienation, potentially widening the emotional gap between them. Harry leaned back in his chair, the soft creak of the leather punctuating the silence. He considered the children. Archie and Lilibet were young, impressionable, and entirely dependent on the adults around them for stability and emotional guidance. Any confrontation with Meghan had to take into account the indirect effects on their lives. Public exposure, even through accidental leaks, could irreparably alter their upbringing, subjecting them to speculation, criticism, or confusion. Protecting their innocence while resolving adult-level conflicts became a central consideration, adding layers of complexity to his decision-making process. He reflected on past experiences within the royal household. Encounters with Meghan had often required careful calibration of tone, timing, and approach. Her ability to influence narratives, combined with her strategic media acumen, meant that any misstep on his part could be magnified. Harry recognized that emotional honesty was essential, but he also needed tactical precision. His goal was not only to seek truth, but to establish boundaries, protect the children, and maintain the integrity of the family unit. This dual necessity of emotional expression and strategic foresight became the guiding principle for his planning. Harry considered the sequence of confrontation. He mapped out scenarios in his mind, starting with questions about the letters, moving to discussions about the surrogacy arrangements, and concluding with expectations for transparency going forward. Each step required careful phrasing. Questions needed to be open-ended to allow Meghan to respond fully, yet framed in a way that minimized defensiveness. Statements of concern and emotional impact had to convey sincerity without accusation, ensuring that dialogue remained productive rather than adversarial. Harry envisioned rehearsing each segment, anticipating possible reactions, and preparing responses that were factual, calm, and grounded in his understanding of the letters. Simultaneously, he reviewed potential risks. A defensive or aggressive response from Meghan could lead to argumentation, further secrecy, or retaliatory action. The possibility of media leaks, whether intentional or accidental, remained high. Harry calculated the repercussions of partial disclosures versus complete transparency, assessing which elements were critical for immediate understanding and which could be managed gradually. The letters were explicit in certain details, but gaps in timing, intent, and execution required clarification through dialogue. Harry needed to extract this information without creating an environment where defensiveness or manipulation could dominate the conversation. The question of trust weighed heavily on him. Trust had been eroded not only by the letters themselves, but by the extended history of secrecy surrounding their children's origins. Harry understood that rebuilding trust would require consistent transparency, but achieving this could only begin once the initial confrontation was managed effectively. He reflected on his own emotional state, recognizing the need to remain composed, rational, and deliberate. The desire for confrontation had to be tempered by strategic patience. Impulsive action could compromise long-term objectives, particularly the welfare of Archie and Lilibet. Harry also considered the support he would need during the confrontation. Advisors with legal, emotional, and strategic expertise were essential. He envisioned a controlled setting where these advisors could provide guidance, ensure documentation, and intervene if necessary to de-escalate conflict. The presence of trusted professionals would reinforce boundaries, validate his concerns, and create a framework within which Meghan could respond without feeling ambushed. This careful orchestration, he realized, was critical not only for the immediate discussion, but for establishing ongoing protocols for managing sensitive information within the family. At the same time, Harry contemplated the timing. Immediate confrontation could exploit the element of surprise, potentially eliciting unguarded responses, but it risked triggering emotional defensiveness and public exposure. Delaying the discussion allowed for preparation, consolidation of facts, and strategic alignment with advisors. Yet prolonged secrecy could exacerbate feelings of betrayal or mistrust. Harry balanced urgency against prudence, understanding that the optimal moment for engagement would maximize clarity, minimize emotional volatility, and protect the children from indirect exposure. He reviewed the letters themselves with renewed focus, annotating passages, identifying key points, and preparing clarifying questions. Some sections revealed procedural steps for surrogate coordination, while others discussed legal documentation and strategies for public perception. Harry knew that each detail required careful interpretation. Misreading intent could lead to unnecessary conflict, while overlooking critical information could jeopardize both legal standing and family stability. His preparation was meticulous, methodical, and exhaustive, reflecting the gravity of the decisions ahead. Harry also rehearsed potential emotional responses. Anger, disappointment, hurt, and betrayal were natural reactions, but their expression had to be controlled. Displaying unchecked emotion risked undermining authority, escalating conflict, or providing leverage to Meghan in narrative framing. He visualized breathing techniques, measured speech patterns, and deliberate pauses as tools to maintain composure. By internalizing these practices, Harry aimed to approach the confrontation with a balance of emotional authenticity and strategic restraint. In parallel, he considered long-term implications. Beyond the immediate discussion, outcomes from this confrontation could influence legal decisions, public narratives, and familial dynamics for years to come. Agreements on transparency, future disclosures, and protocols for managing sensitive information were essential. Harry contemplated documenting agreements, formalizing understandings, and creating mechanisms for ongoing accountability. These measures were designed to ensure that the revelations of the letters did not become an ongoing source of disruption or conflict. Harry's deliberation extended to the psychological impact on Meghan. Understanding her perspective, motivations, and potential reactions was essential for a productive dialogue. He anticipated defensiveness, rationalizations, and possible attempts to shift blame or minimize significance. By considering these possibilities, Harry could frame questions and statements in ways that encouraged acknowledgement, explanation, and cooperative resolution. His goal was to navigate the conversation without confrontation dominating, creating space for mutual understanding while protecting his children and family integrity. As night settled, Harry finalized a structured plan. He would begin with neutral, factual questions, progress to clarification of surrogacy arrangements, and conclude with establishing protocols for future transparency. Advisors would be present to ensure documentation and guidance, while staff would maintain operational stability. Emotional preparation, rehearsal, and scenario planning would continue, ensuring readiness for any eventuality. Every decision reflected a careful balance of strategic foresight, emotional intelligence, and the overarching priority, protecting Archie and Lilibet from exposure, confusion, or emotional distress. Harry recognized that the confrontation was not simply a personal dialogue, but a pivotal moment in the family's history. The letters had revealed hidden truths, but they also offered an opportunity, the chance to establish clarity, accountability, and trust moving forward. Approaching the discussion with meticulous preparation, strategic awareness, and emotional composure would determine the success of this critical engagement. As he finally rose from his chair, Harry felt a mixture of resolve and apprehension. The letters had changed the landscape, creating a reality that could no longer be ignored. Yet within this revelation lay a path forward, a carefully navigable course that balanced truth, protection, and family integrity. The forthcoming confrontation with Meghan was not merely a conversation. It was a strategic, emotional, and moral imperative, one that demanded courage, clarity, and careful orchestration at every step. Harry knew that preparation alone was not enough. The next step required action. He had spent countless hours analyzing, planning, and anticipating every possible scenario, but now he faced the daunting task of arranging the first formal meeting with Meghan. This was not a casual conversation. It was a carefully orchestrated engagement that would set the tone for all future interactions. The stakes were enormous. The letters had revealed secrets of profound magnitude, touching on surrogacy arrangements, falsified legal documents, and the manipulation of family narratives. Harry had to ensure that the environment, participants, timing, and approach all aligned to achieve clarity without exacerbating conflict. The location was the first critical consideration. Harry wanted a space that was private, neutral, and secure. It had to be a place where emotions could be expressed without fear of interruption, where both parties could speak freely, yet remain contained to prevent leakage of information to the outside world. He considered various royal residences, secluded estates, and even off-site private locations. Ultimately, he chose a private wing within one of the family's lesser-known estates, an environment both familiar and controlled, allowing him to establish authority while reducing the psychological pressure that could arise in more public settings. Security measures were non-negotiable. Harry instructed his team to ensure multiple layers of protection, not merely for his own safety, but to prevent potential leaks, inadvertent recordings, or unauthorized access. Each entry point was monitored, and all communication devices were temporarily secured outside the meeting area. This was essential not to suggest mistrust in a personal sense, but to preserve the integrity of the conversation. The letters themselves were sensitive documents that, if exposed, could have ramifications far beyond their immediate circle, and Harry understood the need to maintain confidentiality and control. Participants were carefully considered. While Harry initially contemplated a private, one-on-one engagement, he recognized the value of having trusted advisors present. Legal counsel was essential, both to clarify technical details in the letters and to ensure that any agreements or statements were accurately documented. A mediator with experience in high-stakes familial negotiations was also included to maintain structure, de-escalate tension, and guide the conversation toward constructive outcomes. Emotional support personnel were positioned discreetly to observe and provide insight into the psychological dynamics at play. This was not about confrontation alone. It was about creating a controlled, informed environment that could navigate complex emotional and legal landscapes simultaneously. Harry's approach to dialogue was methodical. He mapped out the conversation in stages: opening, discussion of the letters, clarification of surrogacy arrangements, exploration of the legal document alterations, and finally, setting expectations for transparency and conduct moving forward. Each stage required precise phrasing, an understanding of likely reactions, and strategic patience. He recognized that emotional honesty was vital, yet unchecked emotion could undermine clarity and control. The challenge lay in balancing emotional expression with strategic management of the conversation, ensuring that each question elicited accurate, unambiguous responses. Anticipating Meghan's reactions was another critical factor. The letters suggested that she was meticulous, protective of her narrative, and adept at influencing perception. Harry knew that direct confrontation could trigger defensiveness, rationalizations, or attempts to redirect the conversation. He therefore prepared neutral, factual entry points, open-ended questions that invited explanation rather than accusation. Statements of concern were carefully framed to convey personal impact without judgmental language, aiming to foster acknowledgement, understanding, and cooperative engagement. Timing also played a crucial role. Harry considered the emotional state of both parties, external pressures, and potential distractions. The meeting had to occur when both could focus, reflect, and communicate clearly. Scheduling was adjusted to minimize stressors, avoid overlapping commitments, and provide space for post-discussion reflection. Harry also ensured that follow-up time was built in, periods where both parties could process information, consult with advisors, and prepare for subsequent interactions. This level of foresight was necessary to prevent impulsive reactions that could derail the discussion or magnify emotional fallout. The letters themselves were organized meticulously for the meeting. Harry created a structured binder with annotations, highlighted passages, and prepared questions for each segment. He focused on clarity, ensuring that each reference was precise and traceable. By doing so, he could avoid ambiguity and maintain a factual foundation for the dialogue. This organization allowed him to reference points systematically, guide the conversation logically, and prevent digressions that could lead to confusion or defensiveness. Harry also rehearsed potential emotional and conversational responses. He anticipated anger, guilt, surprise, and defensiveness from Meghan. He planned his own reactions carefully, preparing measured statements to express hurt without accusation, maintain composure, and reinforce boundaries. Breathing techniques, deliberate pauses, and phrasing strategies were internalized to create a calm, deliberate demeanor. This preparation was not about suppressing emotion but channeling it constructively, ensuring that the conversation remained focused and productive. Contingency planning was another vital aspect. Harry considered multiple scenarios: full acknowledgement, partial disclosure, denial, deflection, and even emotional withdrawal. For each possibility, he prepared responses that maintained control, sought clarification, and minimized escalation. Legal and mediator strategies were aligned to intervene if necessary, preserving the integrity of the conversation and protecting all parties involved. These contingencies were essential for managing risk and ensuring that unexpected reactions did not derail the engagement. The psychological dimension was equally significant. Harry reflected on Meghan's perspective, motivations, and potential fears. Understanding her likely thought processes allowed him to frame questions that could lead to honest disclosure rather than defensiveness. He considered the emotional stakes for her, the perceived need for control, the fear of public scrutiny, and the protective instincts regarding their children. By anticipating these dynamics, Harry aimed to navigate the discussion with empathy while maintaining clarity and accountability. Harry also prepared for the implications of the meeting's outcomes. Any acknowledgement or denial could have cascading effects, influencing legal considerations, public narratives, family dynamics, and the emotional well-being of Archie and Lilibet. He mapped potential scenarios, considering how each response would impact short-term interactions and long-term relationships. Agreements on transparency, documentation, and communication protocols were planned to create structures that could endure beyond the initial confrontation. As the day of the meeting approached, Harry rehearsed mentally and emotionally. He visualized the setting, participants, and sequence of dialogue. He imagined Meghan's responses, anticipated challenges, and formulated clear, factual, and emotionally grounded statements. Every detail was considered, from seating arrangements to the tone of voice, ensuring that he could guide the engagement effectively while allowing space for honest disclosure. Ultimately, Harry understood that this meeting was not simply about uncovering truth, but about creating a foundation for accountability, transparency, and the protection of his children. The letters had revealed a hidden reality, but the confrontation was the first opportunity to address it directly, establish boundaries, and define expectations. It was a moment that would shape relationships, influence family dynamics, and set a precedent for how sensitive information would be managed in the future. The meticulous planning, strategic foresight, and emotional preparation were all aimed at one goal: achieving clarity, preserving family integrity, and navigating a complex, emotionally charged situation with precision. Harry was ready to move from contemplation to action, to engage in a dialogue that balanced honesty, empathy, and control. The meeting with Meghan represented not just a confrontation, but a pivotal turning point. A carefully orchestrated engagement that could define the trajectory of family dynamics, public perception, and the well-being of Archie and Lilibet. As he reviewed the final details one last time, Harry felt a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The letters had altered the landscape irrevocably, and the meeting would determine how truth, accountability, and family integrity could be reconciled. Every aspect of preparation, the location, security, participants, dialogue structure, emotional readiness, and contingency planning, was aligned to navigate the conversation with precision. In the quiet moments before engagement, Harry understood that this meeting was more than an exchange of words. It was a strategic, emotional, and moral imperative, the first step in confronting the realities revealed by the letters, and the foundation for moving forward with clarity and purpose. The air in the private wing was heavy with anticipation as Harry entered the room. The polished wood floors reflected the soft, ambient lighting, and the walls, adorned with muted portraits of the family lineage, seemed to watch silently, bearing witness to the confrontation about to unfold. Every detail of the room had been meticulously arranged to balance intimacy with formality. The chairs were positioned to allow clear eye contact without creating a sense of threat. The table between them was clear except for the binder containing the letters, and the atmosphere was intentionally neutral, avoiding triggers that might escalate tension. This was a stage meticulously set for a conversation that had the potential to reshape relationships and reveal truths long hidden. Meghan entered moments later, her expression carefully measured, a mix of apprehension and guarded composure. Harry noticed immediately the subtle tension in her posture, the slight stiffness in her shoulders, the deliberate placement of her hands. It was clear she sensed the gravity of the meeting, though whether she anticipated the depth of the revelations was uncertain. Harry took a measured breath, reminding himself that the goal was clarity, understanding, and accountability, not a spectacle of blame or confrontation. He began with a calm, deliberate tone, choosing words that conveyed seriousness without aggression. "Meghan, I've been reviewing some documents that came into my possession. They're letters and notes that reference arrangements regarding Archie and Lilibet's birth. I need to understand their context directly from you." His voice was steady, carrying the weight of concern, disbelief, and the need for truth. He placed the binder on the table, sliding it slightly toward her without force. Meghan's eyes flickered briefly to the binder. For a moment, there was an almost imperceptible hesitation, a micro-expression revealing surprise mixed with caution. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. A defensive posture that Harry noted but chose not to comment on. Instead, he waited, allowing her to process the statement and observe her initial reaction. In situations of high emotional stakes, pauses could often elicit more truth than immediate responses. "I want to clarify," Harry continued, "that this is not about blame. It's about understanding what happened, the decisions made, and why certain steps were taken. The letters imply surrogacy arrangements and adjustments to legal documentation that were not communicated to me or others closely involved. I need your perspective on this." Meghan's voice was calm but measured, almost rehearsed. "Harry, I don't know exactly which letters you're referring to. Can you be specific?" She gestured toward the binder without opening it, signaling both acknowledgement and caution. Harry recognized the tactic, maintaining control over the conversation by requesting specifics, potentially to navigate around uncomfortable admissions. He opened the binder to the first highlighted letter, a document dated several months before Archie's public introduction. This letter, Harry said, pointing to a passage underlined in bold ink, discusses arrangements for another party to carry the children and mentions adjusting official paperwork to present them as your own. Can you explain what is meant here? Meghan's eyes shifted quickly to the page. There was a pause, an almost imperceptible exhale, before she responded. Those notes were preliminary discussions. The language is more technical than reflective of any final decisions. She maintained a composed demeanor, but Harry noticed the slight quiver in her voice, a subtle sign of underlying tension. Harry leaned forward, keeping his tone controlled but firm. Technical discussions, or not, these documents suggest a plan to create a narrative for the births. I'm asking you directly, were surrogates used? Were legal documents altered to conceal this? Meghan's eyes met his, her composure slightly faltering. Harry, it's complicated. There were considerations, discussions, but nothing finalized without agreement and privacy in mind. The intention was never to deceive you personally, but to protect the children and manage the public narrative. You know how intense the scrutiny has been. Harry could feel a mixture of relief and disbelief. Relief that she did not outright deny every suggestion, disbelief at the admission that discussions alone had been so formalized that they resembled operational plans. He needed clarity. Meghan, the letters are explicit. They outline concrete steps, names, and processes. This isn't vague discussion. This is documentation that appears to confirm surrogacy and adjustments to legal records. You can't dismiss it as preliminary notes. I need a truthful answer. Meghan's composure wavered further. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table, a subtle rhythm betraying inner conflict. Harry, I understand why this is difficult. The intention was always to ensure the children were safe and cared for, with privacy maintained. The letters reflect planning for all eventualities, not the public story. There was never an intent to harm or deceive you as a father. The emotional weight of her words pressed on Harry, yet his sense of responsibility remained sharper. Intentions aside, the reality is that I was kept in the dark. I discovered these letters, and they confirm arrangements I had no knowledge of, decisions impacting our children. That lack of transparency is the issue. I need to know, did these surrogacy arrangements occur? Are Archie and Lilibet born through surrogates, as the letters suggest? Meghan's gaze dropped for a brief moment before returning to his eyes. Yes, Harry, the arrangements involved surrogates. Every step was taken to protect the children, and I didn't anticipate you discovering this in this manner. I wanted to manage it with care, avoiding public speculation or intrusion. A heavy silence filled the room. Harry's mind raced, questions, emotions, and disbelief colliding. He had prepared for denial, deflection, or partial admission, but the direct confirmation brought a complex mix of anger, hurt, and the urgent need to understand the full scope of actions. And the legal documents? He asked, his voice quieter, yet laced with intensity. Were they altered to reflect that you gave birth when in fact you did not? Meghan's voice was steadier, but the admission carried a weight. Yes, legal documentation was managed to reflect what the public would understand, to avoid unnecessary scrutiny and maintain continuity in the children's records. Every step was taken with legal counsel and privacy in mind. Harry exhaled, his throat tight. The letters had been accurate, the documentation had been altered, and the truth was now before him. Yet amidst the validation of suspicion, the emotional impact of confirmation was staggering. This was not merely administrative. It was a personal and familial rupture, a revelation that demanded processing. He took a moment to gather composure, shifting the focus to implications rather than accusation. We need to consider what this means for transparency, the children's future, and family trust. The secrecy, the lack of communication, it affects everyone involved. How do we proceed from here, honestly and responsibly? Meghan nodded, her own relief mingled with apprehension. I agree. The priority has always been the children's well-being. If this is to move forward constructively, we need to establish clear communication, set boundaries, and ensure that decisions are transparent and collaborative where necessary. Harry recognized the shift. While painful, the acknowledgement allowed for structured dialogue. They began reviewing each letter in sequence, discussing the context, intentions, and rationale behind the plans outlined. Every paragraph was examined, clarifying ambiguities and ensuring that assumptions were addressed directly. The mediator guided moments of emotional tension, reminding both parties to pause and reflect before responding, preventing escalation and maintaining clarity. Legal advisors took notes meticulously, documenting admissions and providing guidance on potential ramifications. While the conversation was emotionally charged, the structured approach allowed both Harry and Meghan to navigate the discussion without devolving into confrontation. Emotional honesty was expressed, questions were answered, and the factual foundation of the letters was addressed in detail. As the session continued, Harry reflected on the complexity of human decisions under extreme scrutiny. Privacy, protection, and public perception had intersected with personal relationships, resulting in actions that, while legally managed, had profound emotional consequences. The conversation revealed not only procedural truths, but insights into motivations, fears, and the psychological landscape surrounding the surrogacy arrangements. By the end of the meeting, both Harry and Meghan had articulated perspectives, acknowledged decisions, and outlined immediate next steps. Boundaries were set, transparency protocols were discussed, and plans for communication regarding the children were formalized. While the emotional weight remained, the factual understanding and structured approach provided a path forward, a framework for managing revelations, addressing accountability, and protecting the integrity and well-being of all involved. In leaving the room, Harry understood that the letters had not only confirmed what he suspected but had initiated a necessary reckoning. The confrontation had been challenging, emotionally charged, and revelatory. It marked the beginning of a process, an ongoing journey to navigate trust, family dynamics, and the responsibilities inherent in parenthood. The confirmation of surrogacy and legal alterations was not merely a discovery. It was a turning point, shaping the narrative, decisions, and relationships in ways that demanded care, clarity, and deliberate action. This meeting, though difficult, established the foundation for transparency and understanding. Harry had approached it with strategy, emotional preparation, and legal foresight, ensuring that truth was addressed directly, emotions were managed constructively, and actionable steps were defined for the future. The letters had revealed a reality once hidden, but through measured dialogue, reflection, and acknowledgement, a path forward had been charted, one grounded in honesty, responsibility, and the ongoing commitment to the well-being of Archie and Lilibet. After leaving the room, Harry felt the full weight of the revelation settle upon him. The corridors of the estate, normally echoing with muted footsteps and hushed conversations, now seemed unusually silent, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath in anticipation of his next move. Each step he took reverberated, not merely against the marble floors, but within his own consciousness, reminding him of the delicate balance between personal emotion and the public responsibilities that had always been intertwined with his life. The private truth he had just confronted carried ramifications far beyond the walls of that room, touching family dynamics, public perception, and the emotional well-being of the children he loved more than anything. As he walked, his mind replayed snippets of the conversation, each word from Meghan echoing with clarity and consequence. The confirmation that surrogacy had indeed been used, coupled with the revelation that legal documents had been altered, was both validating and shattering. It validated suspicions that had simmered quietly for years, yet it shattered assumptions about openness and trust within their relationship. Harry had always known there were layers to Meghan's decisions, influenced by intense media scrutiny and pressures from every conceivable direction. But seeing the evidence laid bare before him transformed conjecture into undeniable reality. He found a secluded sitting room, its tall windows framing a subdued sunset over the estate grounds. The fading light cast long shadows across the room, creating a contemplative atmosphere that seemed almost designed for introspection. He sank into an armchair, allowing himself a moment to breathe deeply, trying to reconcile his feelings. The initial surge of shock and disbelief had subsided, replaced now by a gnawing mixture of sorrow, anger, and protective instinct. This was not just about a breach of trust between him and Meghan. It was about the very foundation of his children's lives and the narrative that had been carefully constructed around them. Harry's thoughts turned to Archie and Lilibet, imagining the future conversations and the eventual understanding they would need to have. How would they process the truth of their births? How would it shape their identity, their relationship with their parents, and their perception of family trust? These questions pressed on him with urgency. As a father, he felt an overwhelming responsibility to ensure that the revelation of this truth would be handled with sensitivity, honesty, and a protective shield from the scrutiny of the public. The thought of their innocence being compromised or distorted in the media weighed heavily on him, igniting a fierce determination to safeguard them. In the quiet of the sitting room, Harry allowed himself to recall the earliest hints and subtle inconsistencies that had led him to suspect surrogacy in the first place. Memories of fleeting conversations, cryptic remarks, and peculiar circumstances now took on new significance. Each recollection connected like threads in a complex tapestry, revealing patterns that had been invisible until the letters provided the missing pieces. This retrospective clarity brought a mixture of relief and frustration. The relief of knowing he had been right to question, the frustration that the truth had been concealed for so long, even from him. Harry then began to consider the broader implications for his relationship with Meghan. Trust, once fractured, required deliberate effort to repair. He weighed the conversations they had shared over the years, the private moments of intimacy and vulnerability, against the undeniable reality of strategic decisions made without his knowledge. He recognized the complexity of human behavior under extraordinary circumstances. The intense pressure of public life, the relentless scrutiny, and the perceived necessity of controlling information to protect personal and familial interests. Yet, despite understanding these pressures, he could not dismiss the emotional impact of the secrecy or the profound effect it had on their partnership. He turned his attention to the legal ramifications of the letters and the documented adjustments to birth records. Each detail outlined in the letters represented not merely procedural choices, but deliberate actions with potential consequences under law. As a member of the royal family, the intersection of private family decisions and public legal standards was uniquely intricate. He knew that navigating this terrain required careful consultation with advisors, legal experts, and possibly mediators to ensure that all actions moving forward were both ethically sound and legally defensible. The realization reinforced the need for a structured, methodical approach rather than impulsive reaction. Harry's mind oscillated between immediate emotional response and strategic planning. He felt the pull of deep personal hurt, the sting of perceived betrayal, and the desire for clarity, yet he also recognized the necessity of measured decision-making. Every action taken in response to these revelations would ripple outward, affecting relationships with family members, public perception, and, most importantly, the well-being of his children. The balance between addressing personal feelings and fulfilling responsibilities as a father and public figure was delicate and demanding. He allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, leaning back in the chair and closing his eyes. Memories of early parenthood, the innocence and joy of his children's first smiles, first words, and first steps, mingled with the current tension. He realized that protecting these moments and the integrity of their family narrative required both emotional resilience and strategic foresight. The task ahead was not merely to process the revelation, but to act upon it in a way that honored truth, maintained dignity, and safeguarded the future of Archie and Lilibet. In considering the next steps, Harry began drafting a mental framework for discussions with Meghan. He recognized that confrontation without resolution could lead to further emotional distance and potential public misinterpretation. Structured dialogue, clear boundaries, and transparent communication would be essential. He needed to address the emotional consequences, logistical realities, and public implications in a manner that balanced honesty with protection. The letters were not simply a personal discovery. They were a catalyst for comprehensive reflection, dialogue, and planning. He also contemplated the broader public narrative. As a figure constantly under media scrutiny, Harry knew that any leak or misinterpretation of the situation could ignite speculation, sensationalism, and distortion. Controlling the narrative while remaining truthful presented a paradoxical challenge. He considered engaging trusted advisors, media consultants, and legal experts to prepare a measured response should public disclosure become necessary. Maintaining credibility while navigating the delicate emotional landscape required both foresight and strategic communication. As evening descended, Harry felt the full spectrum of emotions coalesce into a steely resolve. The discovery of the letters, the confirmation of surrogacy, and the adjustments to legal documents had shaken him, but they had also provided clarity. Understanding the truth, however difficult, allowed him to approach future decisions with informed intentionality. He resolved to prioritize his children's well-being, maintain open communication with Meghan where possible, and establish clear parameters for trust and accountability moving forward. Throughout the night, Harry reflected on the intersection of personal and public life, the complexities of trust and secrecy, and the responsibilities inherent in parenthood. The revelation of surrogacy arrangements and altered documentation was more than a factual discovery. It was an emotional crucible, challenging his assumptions, testing his resilience, and compelling him to act with both heart and reason. The letters had exposed a hidden dimension of family dynamics, and now it was his task to navigate the consequences with discernment, care, and unwavering commitment to truth and protection. By the time the first light of dawn touched the estate, Harry had begun to outline the necessary steps for addressing the situation. Conversations with legal advisors, private family discussions, and careful planning for communication with key stakeholders were prioritized. He recognized that the journey ahead would require patience, empathy, and strategic thinking. The emotional impact of the discovery remained profound, yet the clarity it provided was invaluable. Harry's reflections underscored the duality of his position. As a father, he was deeply invested in the personal implications of these revelations. As a public figure, he was acutely aware of the broader consequences for perception, responsibility, and legacy. Balancing these realms demanded careful navigation, guided by honesty, accountability, and protective foresight. The discovery had irrevocably altered the landscape of his personal and familial life, but it had also illuminated a path forward, a path that required courage, clarity, and unwavering commitment to truth. Harry knew that the discovery of Meghan's letters could not remain a private burden. The implications stretched far beyond the walls of the estate, beyond the intimacy of personal betrayal, and into a network of familial, legal, and public domains that demanded careful consideration. The first call he made was to his closest advisors, those he trusted implicitly to navigate both emotional and strategic complexities. Each word he spoke carried weight, for even a minor misstep could result in leaks, misinterpretations, or public backlash. The advisors listened intently, some with shock, some with a measured sense of readiness, aware that the next steps would require precision, discretion, and emotional intelligence. Harry began by outlining the contents of the letters. His voice, though steady, carried the gravity of revelation. He described the explicit plans Meghan had documented, the arrangements for surrogates, and the deliberate steps taken to modify legal documents so that her role as the biological mother appeared unchallenged. The advisors, experienced in managing high-stakes family and public situations, absorbed the information with quiet intensity, asking clarifying questions and noting the points that would have the greatest legal, emotional, and public implications. He emphasized the emotional dimensions first. "This is more than just paperwork," he explained. "This affects our children. It affects the trust between us. And it affects how the world will perceive our family if this information becomes public." The advisors nodded, understanding that any response required a multi-layered approach. First, to process and manage the immediate emotional impact. Second, to plan legal and practical steps. And third, to anticipate and shape the narrative should the situation leak beyond the private circle. Each layer demanded a careful balance of discretion and transparency, empathy and pragmatism. Harry outlined his concerns for Archie and Lilibet. While they were young, he knew that secrets of this magnitude could never remain hidden indefinitely. The letters revealed truths that might one day need to be communicated to them in a manner that preserved their sense of security, self-worth, and identity. The advisors explored potential scenarios, asking, at what age should children be told? How can the information be presented without damaging their perception of either parent? How should the emotional fallout be contained, both within the family and in the broader social and media context. Harry listened, reflecting on each question, acutely aware that decisions made in haste could have long-lasting consequences. The conversation naturally shifted to legal ramifications. The modification of official birth documents and the orchestration of surrogacy arrangements were not merely private family matters. They intersected with legal standards, both in the United Kingdom and abroad. Advisors discussed potential inquiries, the need for legal documentation, and the importance of compliance with existing laws. Each action required meticulous record-keeping, ensuring that every move could be justified if challenged in court or scrutinized by public authorities. Harry, though emotionally charged, recognized the necessity of procedural discipline. The discovery of these letters was not just a personal shock. It was a complex legal puzzle demanding careful navigation. As the discussion continued, the advisors encouraged Harry to consider the public communication strategy. Even if the letters remained private, the intense scrutiny of his life, Meghan's life, and the lives of their children meant that secrecy could never be guaranteed. In an era dominated by leaks, social media speculation, and instant journalism, any private revelation had the potential to become a global headline within hours. The advisors stressed the importance of preparing messaging, defining narratives, and creating contingencies for multiple scenarios. Harry agreed that a measured, preemptive strategy was essential, not only to protect the family, but also to ensure that the truth, when shared, would be framed responsibly and compassionately. In the midst of this high-stakes planning, Harry allowed himself to address the personal betrayal he felt. The letters were more than just documents. They were symbols of a profound breakdown in trust. The advisors listened as he recounted the emotional toll, the sleepless nights, and the internal conflict between love, disappointment, and the instinct to protect his family at all costs. They validated his feelings while gently reminding him of the necessity of maintaining composure and strategic clarity. Emotional honesty, they emphasized, was crucial, but it must coexist with deliberate action. In this balance lay the ability to navigate one of the most challenging moments of his life. Harry also reflected on the timing of the discovery. The letters spanned months of planning and coordination, written at moments when the pressure of public life and media scrutiny was at its peak. Understanding the context of the letters was essential, not to excuse deception, but to frame the motivations and pressures that influenced Meghan's decisions. The advisors suggested a thorough review, cross-referencing dates, events, and external factors, to construct a complete understanding of why the letters were written and what they represented in the broader tapestry of family dynamics. Knowledge, they reminded him, was power, not only for decision-making but also for shaping future conversations with Meghan, the children, and, if necessary, the public. The room grew quieter as Harry considered the emotional labyrinth ahead. The letters were a key, unlocking truths that had been hidden from him and perhaps from everyone else. Yet the key also revealed the complexity of trust, communication, and secrecy within a family constantly under the gaze of the world. He reflected on the years of assumptions, the careful observances of behavior, and the small inconsistencies that, in hindsight, had hinted at deeper realities. Understanding now brought clarity, but also a heavy sense of responsibility. The knowledge could not be ignored, and the consequences of action, or inaction, were profound. As the evening wore on, the discussion turned to strategy for immediate next steps. Advisors outlined a phased approach. First, Harry would need to consolidate his understanding of the letters, ensuring complete clarity regarding their contents and implications. Next, he would prepare a private conversation with Meghan, framed by empathy, inquiry, and a clear expression of the emotional impact. Simultaneously, he would engage legal counsel to evaluate all ramifications related to surrogacy arrangements and documentation. Finally, a careful communication plan would be developed, with contingencies for both private resolution and public exposure. Each phase was designed to balance emotional integrity, legal prudence, and public responsibility. In reflecting on these strategies, Harry recognized the duality of his position. As a father, his primary concern was the emotional welfare and stability of his children. As a public figure and member of the royal family, he was acutely aware of the broader implications for reputation, public perception, and institutional integrity. Balancing these roles required a delicate equilibrium, and he understood that any decision would carry lasting consequences. The letters, once a private revelation, had transformed into a catalyst for a comprehensive reevaluation of relationships, responsibilities, and future actions. Throughout the night, Harry allowed himself moments of introspection. He revisited the first time he had sensed irregularities, the quiet doubts that had surfaced in private conversations and subtle observations. Now, armed with the undeniable confirmation in writing, he could see the full trajectory of choices that had led to this point. Each memory, each suspicion, now fit into a coherent pattern, clarifying past uncertainties while opening a path forward. Yet clarity brought not only understanding, but also the heavy weight of accountability and the challenge of charting a path that honored both truth and family bonds. By dawn, Harry had reached a tentative equilibrium. He had confronted the emotional storm, engaged with trusted advisors, and outlined immediate and future strategies. The letters, once a shocking and disorienting discovery, had been transformed into a foundation for informed decision-making. He recognized that the journey ahead would demand continued resilience, clarity of purpose, and unwavering attention to the delicate balance between private truth and public consequence. The revelation would shape the narrative of his family, influence the development of his children, and define the measures he would take to safeguard both emotional integrity and institutional responsibility. Harry's reflections underscored the profound complexity of trust and transparency within the context of extraordinary public life. The discovery of Meghan's letters revealed not just actions but intentions, pressures, and strategies that had remained hidden until this moment. Understanding the letters required a synthesis of emotional insight, legal awareness, and strategic foresight, a combination of skills essential for navigating the intersecting realities of parenthood, partnership, and public responsibility. The night's deliberations had provided both clarity and direction, illuminating a path that would demand courage, discernment, and meticulous care in the days and months to come. The morning air was crisp, yet charged with tension as Harry prepared to confront Meghan. Every step he took through the corridors of the estate carried weight. The halls, usually a backdrop to family life, now seemed charged with the gravity of impending revelation. He paused before the study where he had discovered the letters, the very place where the truth had revealed itself to him. Sitting quietly for a moment, he gathered his thoughts, aware that what he was about to do could redefine their relationship permanently. It was not a confrontation born out of anger, though anger simmered beneath the surface, but out of necessity, a need to understand, to reconcile, and to protect his children. He rehearsed the conversation in his mind, aware that words spoken in haste could inflame an already volatile situation. I need to remain calm, measured, and focused, he thought. The letters were explicit, leaving little room for misinterpretation, yet he knew the power of tone, timing, and phrasing. His advisor's guidance from the previous night echoed in his mind. Approach with clarity, demand honesty, maintain emotional integrity. Every question had to be deliberate, every statement considered. This was not just a discussion about actions. It was about intentions, trust, and the future of their family. When Meghan entered the room, her presence carried a tension that Harry could not ignore. The usual rhythms of their interactions, the ease, the banter, the subtle gestures, were now replaced by a fragile stiffness. Harry took a deep breath, choosing his opening words with care. He began by acknowledging the emotional weight of the conversation. "Meghan," he said, voice calm yet firm, "I need to talk about something I discovered last night. Something serious that affects all of us." He watched her closely, observing her reactions, subtle shifts in posture, the flicker of a gaze, the tension in her hands. Each movement was a signal, a clue to the emotional landscape he would have to navigate. Meghan's expression was difficult to read. For a moment, she appeared composed, almost detached, but Harry could detect the subtle signs of unease. Her eyes betrayed an awareness that she had been found out, that the careful constructions of her plans had been exposed. Harry chose to speak slowly, methodically, allowing the weight of his words to settle without interruption. "I found letters, Meghan. Letters where you discuss arrangements for Archie and Lilibet and steps taken to modify documentation so it appears you gave birth. This is not something I could ignore. The room seemed to shrink around them as the reality of the letters settled between them. Silence followed, a tense pause in which Meghan appeared to weigh her response. Harry observed, noting every inflection, every hesitation. He allowed the pause to exist, understanding that pressure often elicited honesty. Finally, Meghan spoke, her voice measured but carrying undertones of defensiveness. Harry, you have to understand, there were reasons, complex reasons, for these decisions. It wasn't meant to deceive you, only to manage circumstances. Harry's eyes narrowed slightly, a mix of hurt and incredulity surfacing. Complex reasons? He asked, voice steady but carrying the weight of disbelief. Meghan, these weren't just minor choices. These were deliberate arrangements, altering legal documentation, orchestrating surrogacies, keeping everyone, even close staff, in the dark. How could you expect me not to feel betrayed? Each word landed with precision, articulating the gravity of the revelation without descending into uncontrolled emotion. Meghan's posture shifted, a subtle concession, yet her voice remained controlled. Harry, I never wanted you to feel betrayed. Every action was meant to protect the family, to ensure stability for the children. I know it appears differently, but my intention was always for their welfare. Her words, carefully chosen, attempted to frame the actions within a narrative of protection rather than deception. Yet Harry felt the tension between stated intention and actual impact. Protection, in this context, seemed inseparable from manipulation. He leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. Intentions alone are not enough, Meghan. Actions carry consequences, and these actions affect the trust between us, the children, and our understanding of our family. You created a reality in which I was kept unaware of fundamental truths about our own children. How am I supposed to reconcile that? The room was silent again, each heartbeat accentuating the emotional weight of the dialogue. Harry's voice, calm but resolute, demanded not only an explanation but an acknowledgement of the emotional fracture these letters had caused. Meghan's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the composed exterior. Harry, I see that now. I understand how deeply this hurts you, and I regret the secrecy. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I see that it has caused more pain than intended. I never wanted you to find out this way. Her admission, though partial, marked a shift in the conversation, a recognition of emotional impact, if not full accountability for the strategic decisions documented in the letters. Harry absorbed her words, recognizing both the admission and the limitations within it. The letters were concrete evidence, a factual record of deliberate planning. Words of regret or explanation could not erase the documented reality. Yet he also understood the need to navigate the conversation carefully, balancing the desire for truth with the emotional complexities of the moment. Acknowledgement is a start, Meghan, he said. But this goes beyond regret. We need to discuss how to move forward, how to protect the children, and how to rebuild any trust that has been compromised. The dialogue shifted toward practical considerations. Harry raised questions about the involvement of staff, the handling of documentation, and the potential legal and public ramifications. Each question was met with detailed responses from Meghan, revealing both the extent of prior planning and her awareness of the need for discretion. Harry took notes mentally, mapping out the sequence of actions, the participants involved, and the motivations behind each decision. Understanding the full scope was essential not only for personal reconciliation, but also for strategic planning in the event of wider exposure. As the conversation progressed, the emotional intensity fluctuated. Moments of tension gave way to reflective pauses, where both could process the unfolding reality. Harry allowed himself to articulate feelings of betrayal, fear, and confusion, while Meghan attempted to explain rationale, intention, and concern for the children's welfare. The interplay of emotion and explanation created a complex narrative, a shared understanding of choices, consequences, and the divergence between intention and impact. It was a delicate balance, requiring continuous calibration of tone, timing, and response. Harry's questions grew more pointed as he delved deeper into specifics. He asked about timelines, who had been involved in surrogacy arrangements, how legal documents had been handled, and whether there were contingencies planned for eventual disclosure. Meghan's responses were detailed, revealing a meticulous orchestration designed to protect perceived interests. Yet in the precision of planning, Harry discerned the human element, an anxiety-driven desire for control, a fear of exposure, and an intense focus on maintaining a narrative that aligned with her intentions. The conversation eventually turned toward emotional reconciliation and future planning. Harry emphasized the need to establish transparency moving forward, to ensure that the children were raised with integrity and understanding. He stressed the importance of honesty, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Meghan, in turn, acknowledged the necessity of rebuilding trust, recognizing that the letters represented a breach that could not be ignored. Both acknowledged that while past actions could not be undone, the future required deliberate, coordinated effort to navigate the complex interplay of family dynamics, emotional well-being, and public scrutiny. Throughout the exchange, Harry remained acutely aware of the broader implications. The discovery of the letters was not merely a personal revelation. It was a catalyst for reassessing relationships, responsibilities, and narratives. Decisions made in this moment would reverberate through family life, legal considerations, and public perception. Every word, every gesture, every pause carried significance, shaping both immediate responses and long-term strategies. Harry's focus was unwavering, balancing the emotional gravity of betrayal with the necessity of measured, purposeful action. By the end of the conversation, both parties had gained a clearer understanding of the situation, though tension and unresolved questions lingered. Harry had articulated his feelings, sought clarification, and outlined expectations for transparency and accountability. Meghan had offered explanations, admitted the emotional impact, and recognized the need for deliberate action moving forward. While the dialogue did not resolve all complexities, it established a framework for addressing immediate concerns, planning strategic next steps, and initiating a process of rebuilding trust, both privately and in the broader context of family life. As Harry reflected on the conversation, he recognized the duality of relief and ongoing concern. The letters had revealed undeniable truths, yet the act of confrontation had opened a channel for dialogue, understanding, and potential reconciliation. He understood that the path ahead would require sustained effort, careful navigation of legal and emotional landscapes, and unwavering attention to the welfare of the children. The discovery of the letters had transformed from a source of shock to a foundation for informed decision-making, a pivotal moment in the complex journey of family, trust, and responsibility. The day progressed with a deliberate pace, each action measured against the backdrop of revelation. Harry coordinated with advisors to document the outcomes of the conversation, identify immediate priorities, and outline subsequent steps. Legal counsel was engaged to review implications, ensuring compliance with relevant laws and preparing contingencies. Staff were discreetly briefed on necessary adjustments, emphasizing confidentiality and sensitivity. Every element of the day was orchestrated to maintain equilibrium, mitigate risk, and protect both family integrity and public perception. Amid the logistical and strategic considerations, Harry allowed moments for personal reflection. He revisited memories of the early days of marriage, the excitement, and shared dreams, juxtaposed against the stark reality revealed by the letters. The emotional resonance was profound, encompassing disappointment, grief, and cautious hope. Understanding the full scope of Meghan's decisions required integrating factual analysis with emotional insight, a process that demanded patience, clarity. The following hours were filled with painstaking reflection, as Harry attempted to reconcile the love and trust he had once felt with the complex reality the letters revealed. Each page he had read carried not only factual information but emotional weight, exposing decisions that directly impacted his sense of family and his children's well-being. He wandered the private gardens of the estate, letting the cool air brush against his face, trying to sort through an overwhelming mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. He replayed the moment he first uncovered the letters in his mind, the initial shock giving way to a simmering clarity that this was a turning point, a line in the sand that could not be erased. He knew that moving forward required deliberate consideration, balancing emotional processing with the urgent need to act wisely for the children. Harry's mind circled relentlessly around the implications. The surrogacy arrangements, the falsified legal documents, and the secrecy surrounding both children were not minor infractions. They were actions with profound legal, moral, and psychological consequences. How could he ensure that Archie and Lilibet would grow up with a stable understanding of their own identities if foundational truths were hidden? How could he process the fact that the mother he trusted had deliberately constructed a version of reality that excluded him from full knowledge? Each question weighed heavily, and Harry recognized that this was not only about confronting Meghan, but about laying the groundwork for protecting his children from confusion or harm in the years to come. He returned to the study later in the afternoon, where the letters had been discovered, and began methodically reviewing them again. Harry read line after line, annotating in his mind, connecting the dots between correspondence and the broader implications of what was written. He noticed patterns, carefully calculated wording, references to legal counsel, and explicit instructions about controlling the narrative with staff and advisors. It was meticulous, intentional, and undeniable. Each paragraph seemed to whisper a mixture of fear, strategy, and control, as though the letters were both confessions and playbooks for managing perception. Harry's stomach churned with a mixture of rage and disbelief, but alongside it was a chilling recognition of how carefully orchestrated the entire plan had been. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the room, Harry's thoughts shifted to the practicalities of the situation. He had to consider the legal ramifications, the necessity of safeguarding documentation, and the management of communications with advisors and staff. The letters themselves were irrefutable evidence of actions taken without his consent, and each detail carried potential consequences in both private family dynamics and public scrutiny. Harry understood that his next steps would be scrutinized, analyzed, and debated, and he had to proceed with both caution and decisiveness. Every move required strategic forethought, blending emotional intelligence with pragmatic planning. Harry also contemplated the psychological impact on the children. Archie and Lilibet's identities were at the center of this revelation, and he needed to ensure that the truth, or at least the clarity he could responsibly provide, would protect them. He considered how conversations might unfold in the future, how questions might arise naturally as they grew older, and how he could create an environment of trust and security despite the deception he had uncovered. These were not hypothetical concerns. They were immediate, pressing, and emotionally urgent. He knew that failure to manage this correctly could have lasting effects on their understanding of family, trust, and personal integrity. During the evening, Harry convened a discreet meeting with key advisors and legal counsel. The focus was on assessing the content of the letters, identifying necessary legal steps, and formulating a strategy to manage both immediate reactions and long-term implications. Advisors provided insights into potential legal consequences, risks associated with disclosure, and strategies for managing interactions with staff and the media. Harry listened intently, weighing each recommendation against his own understanding of morality, responsibility, and emotional truth. He realized that navigating this required both tactical precision and emotional resilience, ensuring that every decision supported the welfare of his children and preserved as much personal integrity as possible. Amid these logistical considerations, Harry took time to process personal emotions. The letters were more than just documents. They were a symbol of broken trust, a tangible representation of choices made without his knowledge. He felt the sting of betrayal deeply, not only in terms of marital trust, but also in the broader sense of family cohesion. Questions about loyalty, honesty, and shared responsibility reverberated through his mind. Yet Harry also recognized that dwelling exclusively on hurt would impede his ability to act decisively. Emotional clarity required acknowledgement of feelings without being consumed by them, channeling energy toward constructive action rather than destructive retribution. As night fell, Harry returned to the letters one final time before resting. He read with renewed focus, tracing the trajectory of decisions, the rationalizations presented, and the implicit understanding that secrecy had been considered paramount over openness. He considered the human motivations behind these actions, the fear of judgment, the desire for control, the perceived necessity to protect, and weighed them against the tangible consequences of exclusion and deception. Each reflection deepened his understanding not only of Meghan's choices, but of the broader dynamics at play within the family. He realized that moving forward would require careful negotiation, clear boundaries, and an unwavering focus on ethical responsibilities. Harry also began to draft an internal plan for confronting the broader family network, preparing to communicate elements of the discovery to those who needed to know without compromising security or creating unnecessary conflict. He anticipated questions, objections, and concerns, and formulated responses that balanced honesty, discretion, and moral clarity. This was not simply damage control. It was an exercise in reasserting the ethical center of his family and ensuring that truth, transparency, and protection of the children would guide future actions. Harry's mind worked tirelessly, anticipating challenges, weighing risks, and imagining outcomes, all while maintaining a core focus on family integrity. In the quiet hours, Harry reflected on the complex interplay of love, trust, and responsibility. The letters had revealed a difficult truth, yet they also presented an opportunity. A chance to confront deception directly, to establish clearer boundaries, and to ensure that his children's understanding of family and identity was grounded in honesty. Harry understood that the path forward would be neither simple nor painless, but it was necessary. Each decision would reverberate through the family structure, shaping relationships, perceptions, and emotional realities. He felt the weight of that responsibility profoundly, yet he also felt a measure of resolve, a determination to act with integrity, courage, and foresight. By early morning, Harry had completed a thorough review of all documents, notes, and correspondence. He created a structured framework for addressing both immediate and long-term implications, encompassing personal dialogue with Meghan, discussions with advisors and legal counsel, and consideration of public disclosure if necessary. Every step was meticulously planned, balancing emotional truth with strategic necessity. Harry recognized that this moment, discovery, confrontation, and reflection, marked a pivotal turning point in his life, one that demanded careful stewardship, unwavering ethical commitment, and a relentless focus on protecting the children above all else. With the first light of dawn streaming through the windows, Harry paused to consider the journey ahead. The discovery of the letters had unleashed a torrent of emotional, legal, and familial challenges, yet it also illuminated a path forward, a chance to confront difficult truths, rebuild trust where possible, and ensure that the legacy of integrity, honesty, and protection for his children would remain unshaken. Harry understood that the coming days, weeks, and months would test resilience, judgment,